It is important for me to proceed with the message that stuck with me from the film, a family tree narrative, Marchand of the Okanagan, which is, how do you know where you're going if you don't know where you are from? In order for me to move forward in a place of decolonization, I feel it is important to investigate my family history and face the realities of the relationships had with Indigenous people. It is impossible to go back in time, but it is not impossible to recover the stories about it and to recover the basic spiritual cosmological bonds that connect us to our ancestors. In grounding myself in the work of the Marchand family and Waziatowin Angela Wilson, I have been inspired and able to recover family history I had no prior knowledge of. Through researching archives and ancestry websites, which I built my family tree, I discovered that the first Meineke came to Canada in 1776 from Germany. Meineke was the original spelling, but upon coming to Canada, the name was changed to Meineke. In my research, I discovered that the Meineke family was one of the earliest immigrant families to live in the Dominion of Ontario. I also discovered that my dad's mom's side of the family sailed to America from England in 1635 on the Elizabeth and Anne ship and settled in Plymouth, Massachusetts, 4 years after the first settlers. This ancestor's name was Alexander Baker. He would be my 9th great-grandfather. I found out that in 1676, the state of Massachusetts imposed a fine on him for violating a town order, forbidding the employment or entertainment of a Native American. What then followed was a petition by Alexander Baker asking that he be allowed to retain his native servant. Reading this struck me, knowing that I have ancestors of the earliest settlers in both what is now today known as Canada and the U.S. makes colonization very real for me. I was not prepared to come across stories like this, but all I can think is that 8 generations later, and colonization stops with me. In researching my family history, I now feel grounded in my identity, moving forward with my decolonization process. I found information I never would have imagined, and in taking from Cree Native Memory by McLeod, the notion of spiritual history simply urges us to try and engage the narratives through the lens of those who originally experienced it. I realize that I am part of a collective memory larger than myself. These ancestors that I discovered are my grandpa and grandma's ancestors. And being that I never got to meet them, this experience has allowed me to hear the echo of old stories. I now know where I really come from and can now work on where I am going. Although white persons of financial means often commissioned these photographs for their personal use, Native peoples most likely did not, nor did they come to own them. In finding these pictures of my ancestors, I thought of the pictures in Jennifer Denetdale's book, and how the posing and backdrops the photographer used were very similar, making the whole process extremely colonial. The eyes in the Indigenous people in Jennifer Denetdale's book spoke like my ancestor eyes did not. My ancestors were not fighting to survive. My ancestors had not had to endure change at the deepest level, that being in their cultural beliefs and practices. It was only a change of scenery for them, and change was something that they did not have to endure. The ability to adapt and incorporate new forms and thought into existing cultural beliefs and practices has meant survival and prosperity. 8 generations of colonialism, and it stops with me. The decolonization principles have allowed me to promote the use of personal and collective memory and responsibility in the remembering of the past and truth-telling through the research of my ancestors and the realities had of relationships with Indigenous people. I take great responsibility of the knowledge of these stories, and they will shape my future actions. as 8 generations of colonialism, and it stops with me. My journey of decolonization begins on the Okanagan Indian Band 1, where for 46 years my family has had a cabin on the Parker family's land. For 22 years, I have walked on this land as a colonialist, oblivious to the history of the land and the Indigenous families around me. In acknowledging that I am a visitor of this nation and realizing that decolonization must be initiated by the colonized, it is then my responsibility to ask permission from the land and the Indigenous families, which is why I didn't go to the land for my project, as when knowledge or data is extracted from Indigenous communities without permission, we experience a continuation of colonialism. I did not receive permission to visit the land my cabin is on. However, I asked, and asking is something I had never participated in before. I look forward to the day when I can visit my cabin in a place of decolonization and know the landscapes that have raised me in the way that they are supposed to be known. Thanks to Kusapi by Shirley Louie. These texts, the 4 R's, and lessons I continue to learn in Indigenous 203 are a gift that I will treat with great respect and responsibility. I will act upon these and do great things with this gift in forever walking in a place of decolonization. I will continue to explore what can result from relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people when non-Indigenous people work from a place of decolonization.